I'm going to read a few of the opening chapters of The Red Box by Rex Stout. Rex Todhunter Stout was born 1886, died 1975. The Red Box, the fourth of his series of Nero Wolfe novels, was first published in 1937. This material may not be for children. Chapter 1. Wolfe looked at our visitor with his eyes wide open, a sign with him either of indifference or of irritation. In this case it was obvious that he was irritated. "I repeat, Mr. Frost, it is useless," he declared. "I never leave my home on business. No man's pertinacity can coerce me. I told you that 5 days ago. Good day, sir." Llewellyn Frost blinked, but made no move to acknowledge the dismissal. On the contrary, he settled back in his chair. He nodded patiently. "I know I humored you last Wednesday, Mr. Wolfe, because there was another possibility that seemed worth trying. But it was no good. Now there's no other way. You'll have to go up there. You can forget your build-up as an eccentric genius for once. Anyhow, an exception will do it good. The flaw that heightens the perfection. The stutter that accents the eloquence. Good Lord, it's only 20 blocks, 52nd between 5th and Madison. A taxi will take us there in 8 minutes. Indeed. Wolfe stirred in his chair. He was boiling. How old are you, Mr. Frost? Me, 29. Hardly young enough to justify your childish effrontery. So, you humored me. You speak of my build-up, and you undertake to stampede me into a frantic dash through the maelstrom of the city's traffic in a taxicab. Sir, I would not enter a taxicab for a chance to solve the Sphinx's deepest riddle with all the Nile's cargo as my reward." He sank his voice to an outraged murmur. Good God, a taxicab. I grinned a bravo at him, twirling my pencil as I sat at my desk, 8 feet from his. Having worked for Nero Wolfe for 9 years, there were a few points I wasn't skeptical about anymore. For instance, that he was the best private detective north of the South Pole, that he was convinced that outdoor air was apt to clog the lungs, that it short-circuited his nervous system to be jiggled and jostled, that he would have starved to death if anything had happened to Fritz Brenner on account of his firm belief that no one's cooking but Fritz's was fit to eat. There were other points, too, of a different sort, but I'll pass them up, since Nero Wolfe will probably read this. Young Mr. Frost quietly stared at him. "You're having a grand time, Mr. Wolfe, aren't you?" Frost nodded. "Yes, you are. A girl has been murdered. Another one, maybe more, is in danger. You offer yourself as an expert in these matters, don't you? That part's all right. There's no question but that you're an expert. And a girl's been murdered, and others are in great and immediate peril, and you rant like Booth and Barrett about a taxicab in a maelstrom. I appreciate good acting, I ought to, since I'm in show business, but in your case, I should think there would be times when a decent regard for human suffering and misfortune would make you wipe off the makeup. And if you're really playing it straight, that only makes it worse. If, rather than undergo a little personal inconvenience—" "No good, Mr. Frost." Wolfe was slowly shaking his head. "Do you expect to bully me into a defense of my conduct? Nonsense. If a girl has been murdered, there are the police. Others are in peril. They have my sympathy, but they hold no option on my professional services. I cannot chase perils away with a wave of my hand, and I will not ride in a taxicab. I will not ride in anything, even my own car with Mr. Goodwin driving, except to meet my personal contingencies. You observe my bulk. I am not immovable, but my flesh has a constitutional reluctance to sudden, violent, or sustained displacement. You spoke of decent regard. How about a decent regard for the privacy of my dwelling? I use this room as an office, but this is my home. Good day, sir. The young man seemed flushed, but did not move. You won't go, he demanded. I will not. 20 blocks, 8 minutes, your own car. Confound it, no. Frost frowned at him. He muttered to himself, They don't come any stubborner. He reached to his inside coat pocket and pulled out some papers, selected one and unfolded it and glanced at it, and returned the others. He looked at Wolfe. I've spent most of 2 days getting this thing signed. Now wait, hold your horses. When Molly Locke was poisoned a week ago today, it looked phony from the beginning. By Wednesday, 2 days later, it was plain that the cops were running around in circles, and I came to you. I know about you. I know you're the one and only. As you know, I tried to get McNair and the others down here to your office, and they wouldn't come. And I tried to get you up there, and you wouldn't go. And I invited you to go to hell. That was 5 days ago. I paid another detective $300 for a lot of nothing. And the cops from the inspector down are about as good as Fanny Bryce would be for Juliet. Anyhow, it's a tough one, and I doubt if anyone could crack it but you. I decided that Saturday, and during the weekend, I covered a lot of territory. He pushed the paper at Wolfe. What do you say to that? Wolfe took it and read it. I saw his eyes go slowly half shut, and I know that whatever it was, its effect on his irritation was pronounced. He glanced it over again, looked at Llewellyn Frost through slits, then extended the paper toward me. I got up to take it. It was typewritten on a sheet of good bond, plain, and was dated New York City, March 28, 1936. To Mr. Nero Wolfe. At the request of Llewellyn Frost, we, the undersigned, beg you and urge you to investigate the death of Molly Locke, who was poisoned on March 23rd at the office of Boyden McNair, Incorporated, on 52nd Street, New York. We entreat you to visit McNair's office for that purpose. We respectfully remind you that once each year you leave your house to attend the Metropolitan Orchid Show, and we suggest that the present urgency, while not as great to you personally, appears to us to warrant an equal sacrifice of your comfort and convenience. With high esteem, Winold Gluckner, Kyler Ditson, T.M. O'Gorman, Raymond Plen, Charles E. Shanks, Christopher Bamford. I handed the document back to Wolfe and sat down and grinned at him. He folded it and slipped it under the block of petrified wood that he used for a paperweight. Frost said, "That was the best I could think of to get you. I had to have you. The thing has to be ripped open. I got Del Pritchard up there, and he was lost. I had to get you somehow. Will you come?" Wolfe's forefinger was doing a little circle on the arm of his chair. "Why the devil," he demanded, "did they sign that thing?" "Because I asked them to. I explained. I told them that no one but you could solve it, and you had to be persuaded. I told them that besides money and food, the only thing you were interested in was orchids, and that there was nobody who could exert any influence on you but them, the best orchid growers in America. I had letters of introduction to them. I did it right. You notice I restricted my list to the very best. Will you come?" Wolfe sighed. "Alec Martin has 40,000 plants at Rutherford. He wouldn't sign it, eh?" "He would if I'd gone after him. Gluckner told me that you regard Martin as tricky and an inferior grower. Will you come?" "Humbug." Wolfe sighed again. An infernal imposition. He wiggled a finger at the young man. Look here, you seem to be prepared to stop at nothing. You interrupt these expert and worthy men at their tasks to get them to sign this idiotic paper. You badger me. Why? Because I want you to solve this case. Why me? Because no one else can. Wait till you see. Yes, thank you. But why your overwhelming interest in the case? The murdered girl. What was she to you? Nothing. Frost hesitated. He went on. She was nothing to me. I knew her, an acquaintance. But the danger... Damn it, let me tell you about it. The way it happened. Please, Mr. Frost. Wolfe was crisp. Permit me. If the murdered girl was nothing to you, what standing will there be for an investigator engaged by you? If you could not persuade Mr. McNair and the others to come to me, it would be futile for me to go to them. Well, no, it wouldn't. I'll explain that very well. Another point. I charge high fees. The young man flushed. I know you do. He leaned forward in his chair. Look, Mr. Wolfe, I've thrown away a lot of my father's money since I put on long pants. A good gob of it in the past 2 years, producing shows, and they were all flops. But now I've got a hit. It opened 2 weeks ago, and it's a 10-week buy. Bullets for breakfast. I'll have plenty of cash to pay your fee, if you'll only find out where the hell that poison came from, and help me find a way. He stopped. Wolfe prompted him. Yes, sir, a way. Frost frowned. A way to get my cousin out of that murderous hole. My ortho cousin, the daughter of my father's brother. Indeed. Wolfe surveyed him. Are you an anthropologist? No. Frost flushed again. I told you I'm in show business. I can pay your fee within reason, or even without reason, but we ought to have an understanding about that. Of course, the amount of the fee is up to you, but my idea would be to split it, half to find out where that candy came from, and the other half for getting my cousin Helen away from that place. She's as stubborn as you are, and you'll probably have to earn the first half of the fee in order to earn the second, but I don't care if you don't. If you get her out of there without clearing up Molly Locke's death, half the fee is yours anyhow. But Helen won't scare. That won't work. And she has some kind of a damn fool idea about loyalty to this McNair. Boyden McNair, Uncle Boyd, she calls him. She's known him all her life. He's an old friend of Aunt Kelly's, Helen's mother. Then there's this dope, Gebbert, but I'd better start at the beginning and sketch it. Hey, you going now? Wolfe had pushed his chair back and elevated himself to his feet. He moved around the end of his desk with his customary steady and not ungraceful deliberation. Keep your seat, Mr. Frost. It is 4 o'clock, and I now spend 2 hours with my plants upstairs. Mr. Goodwin will take the details of the poisoning of Miss Molly Locke and of your family complications, if they seem pertinent. For the 4th time, I believe it is, good day, sir. He headed for the door. Frost jumped up, sputtering. But you're coming uptown. Wolfe halted and ponderously turned. Confound you, you know perfectly well I am. But I'll tell you this. If Alec Martin's signature had been on that outlandish paper, I would have thrown it all in the wastebasket. He splits bulbs. Splits them. Archie, we shall meet Mr. Frost at the McNair place tomorrow morning at 10 minutes past 11. He turned and went, disregarding the client's protest at the delay. Through the open office door I heard, from the hall, the grunt of the elevator as he stepped in it, and the bang of its door. Llewellyn Frost turned to me, and the color of his face may have been from gratification at his success, or from indignation at its postponement. I looked him over as a client. His wavy, light brown hair brushed back, his wide-open brown eyes that left the matter of intelligence to a guess, his big nose and broad jaw which made his face too heavy even for his 6 feet. Anyhow, I'm much obliged to you, Mr. Goodwin. He sat down. You were clever about it, too, keeping that Martin out of it. It was a big favor you did me, and I assure you I won't forget. Wrong number. I waved him off. I told you at the time, I keep all my favors for myself. I suggested that round robin only to try to drum up some business, and for a scientific experiment to find out how many eggs it would take to jostle him loose. We haven't had a case that was worth anything for nearly 3 months. I got hold of a notebook and pencil, and swiveled around and pulled my desk leaf out. And by the way, Mr. Frost, don't you forget that you thought of that round robin yourself. I'm not supposed to think. Well, certainly, he nodded. Strictly confidential. I'll never mention it. Okay. I flipped the notebook open to the next blank page. Now, for this murder you want to buy a piece of, spill it. Chapter 2. So the next morning, I had Nero Wolfe braving the elements. The chief element for that day being bright, warm March sunshine. I say I had him because I had conceived the persuasion which was making him bust all precedents. What pulled him out of his front door, enraged and grim, with overcoat, scarf, gloves, stick, something he called gaiters, and a black felt pirate's hat size 8 pulled down to his ears, was the name of Winnold Luckner heading the signatures on that letter. Luckner, who had recently received from an agent in Sarawak 4 bulbs of a pink Collagen pandurata, never seen before, had scorned Wolfe's offer of $3,000 for 2 of them. Knowing what a tough old hiney Luckner was, I had my doubts whether he would turn loose of the bulbs, no matter how many murders Wolfe solved at his request. But anyhow, I had lit the fuse. Driving from the house on 35th Street near the Hudson River, where Wolfe had lived for over 20 years, and I had lived with him for nearly half of them, to the address on 52nd Street, I handled the sedan so as to keep it as smooth as a dip's fingers. Except for one, I couldn't resist. On 5th Avenue near 43rd, there was an ideal little hole about 2 feet across, where I suppose someone had been prospecting for the $26 they paid the Indians, and I maneuvered to hit it square at a good clip. I glanced in the mirror for a glimpse of Wolfe in the back seat, and saw he was looking bitter and infuriated. I said, "Sorry, sir, they're tearing up the streets." He didn't answer. From what Llewellyn Frost had told me the day before about the place of business of Boyden McNair Incorporated, all of which had gone into my notebook and been read to Nero Wolfe Monday evening, I hadn't realized the extent of its aspirations in the way of class. We met Llewellyn Frost downstairs, just inside the entrance. One of the first things I saw and heard as Frost led us to the elevator to take us to the 2nd floor, where the offices and private showrooms were, was a saleswoman who looked like a cross between a countess and Texas Guinan, telling a customer that in spite of the fact that the little green sport suit on the model was of high meadow loom hand-woven material and designed by Mr. McNair himself, it could be had for a paltry $300. I thought of the husband and shivered and crossed my fingers as I stepped into the elevator. And I remarked to myself, "I'll say it's a sinister joint." The floor above was just as elegant, but quieter. There was no merchandise at all in sight, no saleswomen, and no customers. A long, wide corridor had doors on both sides at intervals, with etchings and hunting prints here and there on the wood paneling. And in the large room where we emerged from the elevator, there were silk chairs and gold smoking stands and thick, deep-colored rugs. I took that in at a glance and then centered my attention on the side of the room opposite the corridor, where a couple of goddesses were sitting on a settee. One of them, a blonde with dark blue eyes, was such a pronounced pippin that I had to stare so as not to blink, and the other one, slender and medium dark, while not as remarkable, was a cinch in a contest for Miss 52nd Street. The blonde nodded at us. The slender one said, "Hello, Lou." Llewellyn Frost nodded back. "'Lo, Helen. See you later." As we went down the corridor, I said to Wolfe, "See that? I mean them. You ought to get around more. What are orchids to a pair of blossoms like that?" He only grunted at me. Frost knocked at the last door on the right, opened it, and stood aside for us to precede him. It was a large room, fairly narrow but long, and there was only enough let up on the elegance to allow for the necessities of an office. The rugs were just as thick as up front, and the furniture was decorator's delight. The windows were covered with a heavy yellow silk curtains, sweeping in folds to the floor, and the light came from glass chandeliers as big as barrels. Frost said, "Mr. Nero Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, Mr. McNair." The man at the desk with carved legs got up and stuck out a paw without enthusiasm. "How do you do, gentlemen? Be seated. Another chair, Lou?" Wolfe looked grim. I glanced around at the chairs and saw I'd have to act quick, for I knew that Wolfe was absolutely capable of running out on us for less than that, and having got him this far I was going to hold on to him if possible. I stepped around to the other side of the desk and put a hand on Boyden McNair's chair. He was still standing up. "If you don't mind, sir, Mr. Wolfe prefers a roomy seat, just one of his whims. The other chairs are pretty damned narrow, if you don't mind." By that time I had it shoved around where Wolfe could take it. McNair stared. I brought one of the decorator's delights around for him, tossed him a grin, and went around and sat down by Llewellyn Frost. McNair said to Frost, "Well, Lou, you know I'm busy. Did you tell these gentlemen I agreed to give them 15 minutes? Frost glanced at Wolfe and then back at McNair. I could see his hands, with the fingers twined, resting on his thigh. The fingers were pressed tight. He said, "I told them I had persuaded you to see them. I don't believe 15 minutes will be enough." "It'll have to be enough. I'm busy. This is a busy season." McNair had a thin, tight voice, and he kept shifting in his chair. That is, temporarily his chair. He went on, "Anyway, what's the use? What can I do?" He spread out his hands, glanced at his wristwatch, and looked at Wolfe. "I promised Lou 15 minutes. I am at your service until 11:20. Wolfe shook his head. "Judging by Mr. Frost's story, I shall need more. 2 hours or more, I should say." "Impossible," McNair snapped. "I'm busy. Now 14 minutes. "This is preposterous." Wolfe braced his hands on the arms of the borrowed chair and raised himself to his feet. He stopped Frost's ejaculation by showing him a palm, looked down at McNair, and said quietly, "I didn't need to come here to see you, sir. I did so in acknowledgment of an idiotic but charming gesture conceived and executed by Mr. Frost. I understand that Mr. Kramer of the police has had several conversations with you, and that he is violently dissatisfied with the lack of progress in his investigation of the murder of one of your employees on your premises. Mr. Kramer has a high opinion of my abilities. I shall telephone him within an hour and suggest that he bring you and other persons to my office," Wolfe wiggled a finger, "for much longer than 15 minutes. He moved. I got up. Frost started after him. "Wait," McNair called out. "Wait a minute. You don't understand." Wolfe turned and stood. McNair continued. "In the first place, why try to browbeat me? That's ridiculous. Kramer couldn't take me to your office or any place if I didn't want to go. You know that. Of course, the murder was terrible. Good God, don't I know it? And naturally I'll do anything to help clear it up. But what's the use? I've told Kramer everything I know. We've been over it a dozen times. Sit down." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead and nose and started to return it to his pocket and threw it on the desk. I'm going to have a breakdown. Sit down. I worked 14 hours a day getting the spring line ready, enough to kill a man, and then this comes on top of it. You've been dragged into this by Lou Frost. What the devil does he know about it? He glanced at Lou. I've told it over and over to the police until I'm sick of it. Sit down, won't you? 10 minutes is all you'll need for what I know, anyhow. That's what makes it worse. As I've told Kramer, nobody knows anything. And Lou Frost knows less than that. He glanced at the young man. You know damn well you're just trying to use it as a lever to pry Helen out of here. He transferred the glare to Wolfe. Do you expect me to have anything better than the barest courtesy for you? Why should I? Wolfe had returned to his chair and got himself lowered into it, without taking his eyes off McNair's face. Frost started to speak, but I silenced him with a shake of the head. McNair picked up the handkerchief and passed it across his forehead and threw it down again. He pulled open the top right drawer of his desk and looked in it, muttered, Where the devil's that aspirin? Tried the drawer on the left, reached in and brought out a small bottle, shook a couple of tablets onto his palm, poured half a glass of water from a thermos carafe, tossed the tablets into his mouth and washed them down. He looked at Wolfe and complained resentfully. I've had a hell of a headache for 2 weeks. I've taken a ton of aspirin, and it doesn't help any. I'm going to have a breakdown. That's the truth. There was a knock, and the door opened. The intruder was a tall, handsome woman in a black dress with rows of white buttons. She came in, glanced politely around, and said in a voice full of culture, Excuse me, please. She looked at McNair. That 1241 resort, the cashmere plain tabby with the medium Oxford twill stripe, can that be done in 2 shades of natural Shetland with basket instead of tabby? McNair frowned at her and demanded, What? She took a breath. That 1241 resort... Oh, I heard you. It cannot. The line stands, Mrs. Lamont. You know that. I know, but Mrs. Frost wants it. McNair straightened up. Mrs. Frost, is she here? The woman nodded. She's ordering. I told her you were engaged. She's taking 2 of the Portsmouth ensembles. Oh, she is. McNair had suddenly stopped fidgeting, and his voice, though still thin, sounded more under command. I want to see her. Ask her if it will suit her convenience to wait till I'm through here. And the 1241 and 2 shades of Shetland? Yes, of course. Add $50. The woman nodded, excused herself again, and departed. McNair glanced at his wristwatch, shot a sharp one at young Frost, and looked at Wolfe. You can still have 10 minutes. Wolfe shook his head. I won't need them. You're nervous, Mr. McNair. You're upset. What? You won't need them? No. You probably lead too active a life, running around getting women dressed. Wolfe shuddered. Horrible. I would like to ask you 2 questions. First, regarding the death of Molly Locke, have you anything to add to what you have told Mr. Kramer and Mr. Frost? I know pretty well what that is. Anything new? No. McNair was frowning. He picked up his handkerchief and wiped his forehead. No, nothing whatever. Very well. Then it would be futile to take up more of your time. The other question, may I be shown a room where some of your employees may be sent to me for conversation? I shall make it as brief as possible, particularly Miss Helen Frost, Miss Thelma Mitchell, and Mrs. Lamont. I don't suppose Mr. Perrin Gibbert happens to be here. McNair snapped. Gibbert, why the devil should he be? I don't know. Wolfe lifted his shoulders half an inch and dropped them. I ask. I understand he was here 1 week ago yesterday, the day Miss Locke died, when you were having your show. I believe you call it a show? I had a show, yes. Gibbert dropped in. Scores of people were here. About talking with the girls and Mrs. Lamont. If you make it short, you can do it here. I have to go down to the floor. I would prefer something less, more humble, if you please. Suit yourself. McNair got up. Take them to one of the booths, Lou. I'll tell Mrs. Lamont. Do you want her first? I'd like to start with Miss Frost and Miss Mitchell together. You may be interrupted if they're needed. I shall be patient. All right, you tell them, Lou? He looked around, grabbed his handkerchief from the desk and stuffed it in his pocket, and bustled out. Llewellyn Frost, rising, began to protest. I don't see why you didn't... Wolfe stopped him. Mr. Frost, I endure only to my limit. Obviously, Mr. McNair is sick, but you cannot make that claim to tolerance. Don't forget that you are responsible for this grotesque expedition. Where is this booth? Well, I'm paying for it. Not adequately, you couldn't. Come, sir. Frost led us out and back down the corridor and opened the door at the end on the left. He switched on lights, said he would be back soon, and disappeared. I moved my eyes. It was a small paneled room with a table, a smoking stand, full-length mirrors, and 3 dainty silk chairs. Wolfe stood and looked at the mess, and his lips tightened. He said, revolting, I will not. I will not. I grinned at him. I know damn well you wouldn't, and for once, I don't blame you. I'll get it. I went out and strode down the corridor to McNair's office, entered, heaved his chair to my shoulder, and proceeded back to the booth with it. Frost and the 2 goddesses were going in as I got there. Frost went for another chair, and I plunked my prize down behind the table and observed to Wolfe, If you get so you like it, we'll take it home with us. Frost returned with his contribution, and I told him, Go and get 3 bottles of cold light beer and a glass and an opener. We've got to keep him alive. He lifted his brows at me. You're crazy. I murmured, Was I crazy when I suggested that letter from the Orchid guys get the beer? He went. I negotiated myself into a chair with the blonde Pippin on one side and the self on the other. Wolfe was sniffing the air. He suddenly demanded, Are all of these booths perfumed like this? Yes, they are, the blonde smiled at him. It's not us. No, it was here before you came in. Phooey. And you girls work here. They call you models? That's what they call us. I'm Thelma Mitchell. The blonde waved an expert, graceful hand. This is Helen Frost. Wolfe nodded and turned to the self. Why do you work here, Miss Frost? You don't have to, do you? Helen Frost put level eyes on him. With a little crease in her brow between them, she said quietly, My cousin told us you wished to ask us about Molly Locke? Indeed. Wolfe leaned back, warily, to see if the chair would take it. There was no creak, and he settled. Understand this, Miss Frost. I am a detective. Therefore, while I may be accused of incompetence or stupidity, I may not be charged with impertinence. However nonsensical or irrelevant my questions may seem to you, they may be filled with the deepest significance and the most sinister implications. That is the tradition of my profession. As a matter of fact, I was merely making an effort to get acquainted with you. Her eyes stayed level. I am doing this as a favor to my cousin Lou. He didn't ask me to get acquainted. She swallowed. He asked me to answer questions about last Monday. Wolfe leaned forward and snapped. Only as a favor to your cousin. Wasn't Molly Locke your friend? Wasn't she murdered? You aren't interested in helping with that? It didn't jolt her much. She swallowed again, but stayed steady. Interested, yes, of course, but I've told the police. I don't see why you... She stopped herself and jerked her head up and demanded, Haven't I said I'll answer your questions? It's awful. It's an awful thing. So it is. Wolfe turned abruptly to the blonde. Miss Mitchell, I understand that at 20 minutes past 4 last Monday afternoon, a week ago yesterday, you and Miss Frost took the elevator together downstairs and got out at this floor, right? She nodded. And there was no one up here. That is, you saw no one. You walked down the corridor to the fifth door on the left, across the corridor from Mr. McNair's office, and entered that room, which is an apartment used as a restroom for the 4 models who work here. Molly Locke was in there, right? She nodded again. Wolfe said, "Tell me what happened." The blonde took a breath. "Well, we started to talk about the show and the customers and so on, nothing special. We did that about 3 minutes. And then, suddenly, Molly said she forgot, and she reached under a coat and pulled out a box. Permit me. What were Miss Locke's words?" "She just said she forgot. She had some loot." No, please. What did she say, her exact words?" The blonde Frau stared at him. "Well, if I can, she said, let's see. Oh, I forgot, girls. I've got some loot. Swiped it. As clean as a whistle." While she was saying that, she was pulling the box from under the coat. Where was the coat? It was her coat lying on the table. Where were you? Me, I was right here, standing there. She was sitting on the table. Where was Miss Frost? She was across by the mirror, fixing her hair, weren't you, Helen?" The Sylph merely nodded. Wolfe said, "And then, exact words?" "Well, she handed me the box, and I took it and opened it, and I said, had it been opened before?" "I don't know. It didn't have any wrapping or ribbon or anything on it. I opened it, and I said, 'Gee, it's 2 pounds and never been touched. Where'd you get it, Molly?' She said, 'I told you I swiped it. Is it any good?' She asked Helen to have some. Her words." Miss Mitchell frowned. "I don't know. Just have some, Helen, or join the party, Helen, something like that. Anyway, Helen didn't take any." "What did she say?" "I don't know. What did you say, Helen?" Miss Frost spoke without swallowing. "I don't remember. I just had cocktails, and I didn't want any." The blonde nodded. "Something like that. Then Molly took a piece, and I took a piece." "Please?" Wolfe wiggled a finger at her. "You were holding the box?" "Yes, Molly had handed it to me." Miss Frost didn't have it in her hands at all. "No, I told you. She said she didn't want any. She didn't even look at it." "And you and Miss Locke each took a piece?" "Yes, I took a candied pineapple. It was a mixture. Chocolates, bonbons, nuts, candied fruits, everything. I ate it. Molly put her piece in her mouth, all of it, and after she bit into it, she said it was strong." "Words, please." "Well, she said, let's see. 'My God, it's 200 proof, but not so bad. I can take it.' She made a face, but she chewed it and swallowed it. Then, well, you wouldn't have believed how quickly it was." "I'll try. Tell me." "Not more than half a minute. I'm sure it wasn't. I took another piece and was eating it, and Molly was looking into the box, saying something about taking the taste out of her mouth." She stopped because the door opened. Llewellyn Frost appeared, carrying a paper bag. I got up and took it from him, extracted from it the opener, and a glass, and bottles, and arranged them in front of Wolfe. Wolfe picked up the opener and felt of a bottle. "Umph. Schrerer's. It's too cold." I sat down again. "It'll make a bead. Try it." He poured. Helen Frost was saying to her cousin, "So that's what you went for. Your detective wants to know exactly what I said, my exact words, and he asks Thelma if I handled the box of candy." Frost patted her on the shoulder. "Now, Helen, take it easy. He knows what he's doing." One bottle was empty, and the glass. Frost sat down. Wolfe wiped his lips. "You were saying, Miss Mitchell, Miss Locke spoke of taking the taste out of her mouth." The blonde nodded. "Yes, and then, well, all of a sudden she straightened up and made a noise. She didn't scream. It was just a noise, a horrible noise. She got off the table and then leaned back against it, and her face was all twisted. It was twisted. She looked at me, with her eyes staring, and her mouth went open and shut, but she couldn't say anything. And suddenly she shook all over and grabbed for me and got hold of my hair and... "Yes, Miss Mitchell." The blonde gulped. "Well, when she went down, she took me with her because she had hold of my hair. Then, of course, I was scared. I jerked away. Later, when people came, she had a bunch of my hair gripped in her fingers. Wolfe eyed her. You have good nerves, Miss Mitchell. I'm not a softy. I had a good cry after I got home that night. I cried it out, but I didn't cry then. Helen stood against the wall and trembled and stared and couldn't move. She'll tell you that herself. I ran to the elevator and yelled for help, and then I ran back and put the lid on the box of candy and held onto it until Mr. McNair came, and I gave it to him. Molly was dead, I could see that. She was crumpled up. She fell down dead. She gulped again. Maybe you could tell me. The doctor said it was some kind of acid, and it said in the paper potassium cyanide. Lou Frost put in, hydrocyanic, the police say. It's the same thing. I told you that, didn't I? Wolfe wiggled a finger at him. Please, Mr. Frost, it is I who am to earn the fee, you to pay it. Then, Miss Mitchell, you felt no discomfort from your 2 pieces, and Miss Locke ate only 1. That's all. The blonde shivered. It's terrible to think there's something that can kill you that quick. She couldn't even speak. You could see it go right through her when she shook all over. I held onto the box, but I got rid of it as soon as I saw Mr. McNair. Then I understand you ran away. She nodded. I ran to the washroom. She made a face. I had to throw up. I had eaten 2 pieces. Indeed, most efficient. Wolfe had opened another bottle and was pouring. To go back a little. You had not seen that box of candy before Miss Locke took it from under the coat? No, I hadn't. What do you suppose she meant when she said she had swiped it? Why, she meant she saw it somewhere and took it. Wolfe turned. Miss Frost, what do you suppose Miss Locke meant by that? I suppose she meant what she said, that she swiped it, stole it. Was that customary with her? Was she a thief? Of course not. She only took a box of candy. She did it for a joke, I suppose. She liked to play jokes, to do things like that. Had you seen the box before she produced it in that room? No. Wolfe emptied the glass in 5 gulps, which was par, and wiped his lips. His half-shut eyes were on the blonde. I believe you went to lunch that day with Miss Locke. Tell us about that. Well, Molly and I went together about 1 o'clock. We were hungry because we had been working hard. The show had been going on since 11 o'clock, but we only went to the drugstore around the corner because we had to be back in 20 minutes to give Helen and the extras a chance. The show was supposed to be from 11 to 2, but we knew they'd keep dropping in. We ate sandwiches and custard and came straight back. Did you see Miss Locke swipe the box of candy at the drugstore? Of course I didn't. She wouldn't do that. Did you get it at the drugstore yourself and bring it back with you? Miss Mitchell stared at him. She said, disgusted, For the Lord's sake, no. You're sure Miss Locke didn't get it somewhere while out for lunch? Of course I'm sure. I was right with her. And she didn't go out again during the afternoon? No, we were working together until 3:30, when there was a let-up and she left to go upstairs, and a little later Helen and I came up and found her here. They're in the restroom. And she ate a piece of candy and died, and you ate 2 and didn't. Wolfe sighed. There is, of course, the possibility that she had brought the box with her when she came to work that morning. The blonde shook her head. I've thought of that. We've all talked about it. She didn't have any package. Anyway, where could it have been all morning? It wasn't in the restroom, and there wasn't any other place. Wolfe nodded. That's the devil of it. It's recorded history. You aren't really telling me your fresh and direct memory of what happened last Monday. You're merely repeating the talk it has been resolved into. I beg you, no offense. You can't help it. I should have been here last Monday afternoon. Or rather, I shouldn't have been here at all. I shouldn't be here now. He glared at Llewellyn Frost, then remembered the beer, filled his glass, and drank. He looked from one girl to the other. You know, of course, what the problem is. Last Monday there were more than 100 people here, mostly women but a few men, for that show. It was a cold March day and they all wore coats. Who brought that box of candy? The police have questioned everyone connected with this establishment. They have found no one who ever saw the box, or will admit to any knowledge of it. No one who saw Miss Locke with it, or has any idea where she got it. An impossible situation. He wiggled a finger at Frost. I told you, sir, this case is not within my province. I can use a dart or a rapier, but I cannot set traps throughout the territory of the metropolitan district. Who brought the poison here? Whom was it intended for? God knows, but I am not prepared to make a call on him, no matter how many orchid growers are coerced into signing idiotic letters. I doubt if it is worthwhile for me to try even for the second half of your fee, since your cousin, your ortho-cousin, refuses to become acquainted with me. As for the first half, the solution of Miss Locke's death, I could undertake that only through interviews with all of the persons who were in this place last Monday, and I doubt if you could persuade even the innocent ones to call at my office. Lou Frost muttered, It's your job, you took it. If you're not up to it. Nonsense. Does a bridge engineer dig ditches? Wolfe opened the third bottle. I believe I have not thanked you for this beer. I do thank you. I assure you, sir, this problem is well within my abilities, insofar as it is possible to apply them. Insofar, for instance, take Miss Mitchell here. Is she telling the truth? Did she murder Molly Locke? Let us find out. He turned and got sharp. Miss Mitchell, do you eat much candy? She said, You're being smart. I'm begging your indulgence. It won't hurt you, but with nerves like yours, do you eat much candy? She drew her shoulders together and released them. Once in a while. I have to be careful. I'm a model and I watch myself. What is your favorite kind? Candied fruits. I like nuts too. You removed the lid from that box last Monday. What color was it? Brown, a kind of gold brown. What kind was it? What did it say on the lid? It said medley, some kind of a medley. Wolfe snapped. Some kind. Do you mean to say you don't remember what name was on the lid? She frowned at him. No, I don't. That's funny. I would have thought. So would I. You looked at it and took the lid off, and later replaced the lid and held onto the box, knowing there was deadly poison in it, and you weren't even curious enough. Now wait a minute, you're not so smart. Molly was dead on the floor, and everybody was crowding into the room, and I was looking for Mr. McNair to give him the box. I didn't want the damn thing, and certainly I wasn't trying to think of things to be curious about. She frowned again. At that, it is funny I didn't see the name. Wolfe nodded. He turned sharply to Lou Frost. You see, sir, how it is done. What is to be deduced from Miss Mitchell's performance? Is she cleverly pretending that she does not know what was on that lid? Or is it credible that she really failed to notice it? I am merely demonstrating. For another example, take your cousin. He switched his eyes and shot at her. You, Miss Frost, do you eat candy? She looked at her cousin. Is this necessary, Lou? Frost flushed. He opened his mouth, but Wolfe was in ahead. Miss Mitchell didn't beg off. Of course, she has good nerves. The sylph leveled her eyes at him. There's nothing wrong with my nerves, but this cheap... Well, I eat candy. I much prefer caramels, and since I work as a model, and have to be careful too, I confine myself to them. Chocolate caramels? Nut caramels? Any kind, caramels. I like to chew them. How often do you eat them? Maybe once a week. Do you buy them yourself? No, I don't get a chance. My cousin knows my preference, and he sends me boxes of Carlottis. Too often I have to give most of them away. You are very fond of them. She nodded. Very. You find it hard to resist them when offered. Sometimes, yes. Monday afternoon you had been working hard. You were tired. You had had a short and unsatisfactory lunch. She was tolerating it. Yes. Then, when Miss Locke offered you caramels, why didn't you take one? She didn't offer me caramels. There weren't any in that. She stopped. She glanced aside at her cousin, and then put her eyes on Wolfe again. That is, I didn't suppose. Wolfe's voice suddenly softened. Miss Mitchell couldn't remember what was on the lid of that box. Can you, Miss Frost? No, I don't know. Miss Mitchell has said that you didn't handle the box. You were at the mirror fixing your hair. You didn't even look at it. Is that correct? She was staring at him. Yes. Miss Mitchell has also said that she replaced the lid on the box and kept it under her arm until she handed it to Mr. McNair. Is that correct? I don't know. I didn't notice. No, naturally, under the circumstances. But after the box was given to Mr. McNair, from that time until he turned it over to the police, did you see it at all? Did you have an opportunity to inspect it? I didn't see it, no. Just one more, Miss Frost. This finishes the demonstration. Are you sure that you don't know what was on that lid? It was not a brand you were familiar with. She shook her head. I have no idea. Wolfe leaned back and sighed. He picked up the third bottle and filled his glass and watched the foam work. No one spoke. We just looked at him while he drank. He put the glass down and wiped his lips and opened his eyes on his client. There you are, Mr. Frost, he said quietly. Even in a brief demonstration, where no results were expected, something is upturned. By her own testimony, your cousin never saw the contents of that box after Miss Locke swiped it. She doesn't know what brand it was, so she could not have been familiar with its contents, and yet she knew quite positively that there were no caramels in it. Therefore, she saw the contents of the box somewhere, sometime, before Miss Locke swiped it. That, sir, is deduction. That is what I meant when I spoke of interviews with all of the persons who were at this place last Monday. Lou Frost, glaring at him, blurted, You call this? What the hell do you call this? My cousin. I told you, deduction. The Sylph sat pale and stared at him. She opened her mouth a couple of times, but closed it without speaking. Thelma Mitchell horned in. She didn't say she knew positively there were no caramels in it. She only said, Wolfe put a palm at her. You're being loyal, Miss Mitchell. For shame, the first loyalty here is to the dead. Mr. Frost dragged me here because Molly Locke died. He hired me to find out how and why. Well, sir, didn't you? Frost sputtered. I didn't hire you to play goddamn fool tricks with a couple of nervous girls. You damn fat imbecile. Listen, I already know more about this business than you'd ever find out in 100 years. If you think I'm paying you... Now where do you think you're going? What's the game now? You get back in that chair, I say. Wolfe had risen, without haste, and moved around the table, going sideways past Thelma Mitchell's feet. And Frost had jumped up and started the motions of a stiff arm at him. I got upright and stepped across. Don't shove, mister. I would just as soon have plugged him, but he would have had to drop on a lady. Subside, please. Come on, back up. He gave me a bad eye, but let that do. Wolfe had sidled by towards the door, and at that moment there was a knock on it, and it opened, and the handsome woman in the black dress with white buttons appeared. She moved in. Excuse me, please. She glanced around, composed, and settled on me. Can you spare Miss Frost? She is needed downstairs, and Mr. McNair says you wish to speak with me. I can give you a few minutes now. I looked at Wolfe. He bowed to the woman, his head moving 2 inches. Thank you, Mrs. Lamont. It won't be necessary. We have made excellent progress, more than could reasonably have been expected. Archie, did you pay for the beer? Give Mr. Frost $1. That should cover it. I took out my wallet and extracted $1 and laid it on the table. A swift glance showed me that Helen Frost looked pale, Thelma Mitchell looked interested, and the villain looked not set for murder. Wolfe had left. I did likewise, and joined him outside, where he was pushing the button for the elevator. I said, That beer couldn't have been more than 2 bets throw, 75 cents for 3. He nodded, put the difference on his bill. Downstairs we marched through the activity without halting. McNair was over at one side talking with a dark, medium-sized woman with a straight back and a proud mouth, and I let my head turn for a second look, assuming it was Helen Frost's mother. A goddess I hadn't seen before was parading in a brown topcoat in front of a horsey Jane with a dog, and 2 or 3 other people were scattered around. Just before we got to the street door, it opened, and a man entered, a big, broad guy with a scar on his cheek. I knew all about that scar. I tossed him a nod. "Hi, Pearlie." He stopped and stared, not at me, at Wolfe. "In the name of God, did you shoot him out of a cannon?" I grinned and went on. On the way home, I made attempts at friendly conversation over my shoulder, but without success. I tried, "Those models are pretty creatures, huh?" "No sale." I tried. "Did you recognize that gentleman we met coming out, our old friend Pearlie Stebbins of the Homicide Squad, one of Kramer's hirelings?" No response. I started looking for a good hole. There I shall stop, and you may pick up The Red Box by Rex Stout, or any of the other dozens of Rex Stout mystery books.